Welcome to part 2 of the Wilmette Historical Museum's Local Legends audio tour. I'm Sarah Hawkinson, Sunday Coordinator at the Wilmette Historical Museum. I will be your guide on this audio tour. If you would like to listen to part 1 of this audio tour, it is available on our website. Our first stop will be 810 Forest Avenue, once the home of Bob and Jean Cleland. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside the Cleland home. Our first stop, 810 Forest Avenue, was once the home of activist couple Bob and Jean Cleland and their 6 children. Having served in the military during World War II, when a nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bob Cleland worked tirelessly for much of his life on nuclear arms control and disarmament to bring about world peace. In the 1960s, he co-founded the Wilmette chapter of SANE, the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, and was active in the national movement to end the war in Vietnam. In 1979, he helped found the North Suburban Peace Initiative, and he continued to serve on its board until his death in 2010. This organization continues today to work on Bob Cleland's vision for a world at peace under the name of Chicago Area Peace Action. Jean Cleland was committed to addressing civil rights and fair housing issues. In the 1960s, she was an active member of the Wilmette Human Relations Committee, or WHRC, which sought to educate people on issues of racism and fair housing. Shortly after Martin Luther King's 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, Jean Cleland traveled down to Montgomery. Upon her return, she reflected in a letter, quote, "I've rarely felt so right about any stand I have taken and deed I have done as I feel about this particular one. I had felt it was important that the South and the nation as a whole learn that respectable, responsible, well-dressed, and middle-class white people cared sufficiently about this cause to make the pilgrimage and be visible." End quote. Jean Cleland worked with the North Shore Summer Project, which in 1965 brought Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Winnetka's Village Green. She gave Dr. King a lapel pin that read, quote, "Equal Housing," which he wore during the speech. In the 1970s, she was a founding board member of the North Shore Interfaith Housing Council, now known as Open Communities, where she worked to overcome opposition to low-income senior buildings in Wilmette. Cleland Place, a 16-unit affordable housing project on Wilmette Avenue, built in 2021, is on the site of the former Wilmette American Legion Hall. It is named in her honor. Our next stop is 1033 Elmwood Avenue, once the home of Esther Dunshee. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Dunshee's home. Our second stop is 1033 Elmwood Avenue, once the home of Esther Dunshee. Esther Dunshee came to Wilmette with her family in 1887 and grew up to become one of the village's trailblazing women. Her father built this house in 1889, at a time when much of the village was sparsely developed, and there were no sewers, water systems, paved roads, or electricity. Flooding, like now, was a problem. She later remembered, quote, "Our drainage systems consisted of deep ditches on either side of the street, with wooden crossings from the road to the walk leading to the residences. These ditches were great places for the children to play, sailing boats and pretending to fish. There was a very deep ditch on the north side of Linden Avenue, between 6th and 8th Streets, where in the early summer crayfish were abundant, and it was great sport to catch them." End quote. During World War I, Esther Dunshee served in France with the YMCA canteen service, the only woman from Wilmette to do so. Working under difficult conditions, the canteen service provided meals and hot baths to servicemen on leave from the trenches. Miss Dunshee earned a law degree at Lake Forest College. When women were given the right to vote in 1920, she immediately joined the League of Women Voters, and in the 1920s, she led various national committees. She spearheaded the fight to allow women to serve on juries, pleading their case before the Illinois Supreme Court. Opposition to having female jurors came from a variety of corners, including from women. Speaking in 1928 before a group of about 700 women, Esther Dunshee declared, quote, "The real argument we have to combat is that women do not want to serve on juries. Well, do men like jury service? Then why discriminate?" End quote. Retiring after 25 years of practicing law, she recalled that there was, quote, "much prejudice against women lawyers," end quote. Miss Dunshee was a pioneer in many avenues, including being one of the first women to serve as village trustee in the 1930s. Later in life, she married Lauren Bauer and changed her name to Esther Dunshee Bauer. Our next stop will be 1211 Elmwood Avenue, once the home of Jensen. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Jensen's home. Our third stop is 1211 Elmwood Avenue. Many people don't realize that legendary Prairie School landscape designer Jensen spent many years in Wilmette. This was his house, though it has been extensively remodeled since he and his wife Ann-Margret, both natives of Denmark, moved here in 1920. Jensen loved Wilmette and volunteered for local groups, created plans for local projects, and wrote frequently for Wilmette Life about gardens and landscape design. Jensen, sharing his passion for native plants at a gathering at the Women's Club, said, quote, "The secret of gardening is to take native things that belong to the section of the country in which you live, things you love the best, and make something out of them. Express yourself, and you will have a beautiful garden." End quote. An ardent conservationist, Jensen was a driving force behind the Cook County Forest Preserve System and the Illinois State Parks. In 1935, after his wife's death, Jensen moved to Door County, but two of his daughters stayed in Wilmette and raised their families here. Our next stop will be 1128 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of Louis Berghoff. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Berghoff's home. Our fourth stop is 1128 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of Louis Berghoff. The Berghoff family, of Berghoff's restaurant fame, has lived in Wilmette for over 75 years. This house was built in the 1870s as a simple Italianate-style home. Wings were added and the facade altered around 1918 to 1920, creating the more elaborate structure you see today. When Louis Berghoff purchased it in 1936, it sat on an acre of property. He lived here for over 30 years, until his death in 1969. The iconic restaurant at 17 West Adams in Chicago was opened in 1898 by Louis's father, Hermann Berghoff, who emigrated from Germany, then Prussia, in 1870. Two of Hermann's 7 children, Louis and Clement, graduated from Harvard and then came back to work in the family business for the next 30 years, managing Berghoff's restaurant until about 1960. Both brothers lived in Wilmette during these years. Louis's son, Hermann, later took over management and ownership. Hermann remembers his father as a gentleman, as someone who always made it home for evening dinner, even if it had to be late, and as someone who suspected that he was the only Harvard Law School graduate at that time to run a restaurant. For many years, Louis's granddaughter, Carlin Berghoff, who raised her own family in Wilmette, ran the Berghoff catering business out of the restaurant building. Today, Louis's grandson, Pete Berghoff, runs and operates Berghoff's restaurant, continuing the family tradition into the 4th generation. Our next stop will be 1221 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of Josephine Earlywine. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Dr. Earlywine's home. Our fifth stop is 1221 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of local pediatrician Josephine Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine was a long-time resident of Wilmette, moving to the village when she was 5 years old. She earned her medical degree from Northwestern University in 1944, at a time when medicine was primarily a male profession. Later in her career, she was also an associate professor of clinical pediatrics at Northwestern. Dr. Earlywine served on a voluntary basis as director of the Infant Welfare Clinic at the Wilmette Visiting Nurse Association and Health Center. In this role, she examined, treated, and immunized hundreds of infants and children. Whatever fees she received, she donated back to the health center to purchase more vaccines. She also served as the medical director of The Cradle in Evanston, an adoption agency founded in 1923 and still operating today. A popular pediatrician, she had a large private practice in Wilmette. In remembering childhood visits to her office, one resident wrote, quote, "She was the proverbial Jewish grandmother to me in her bedside manners, fussing about over matters such as my diet, less TV, and getting outside as much as possible. A genuine no-nonsense doctor who knew what to do for everything from chickenpox to ear infections." End quote. Dr. Earlywine lived in Wilmette until 10 years before her death. Earlywine Park, a tot lot on Wilmette Avenue, is named in her honor. Our next stop will be 1232 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of Frazier Thomas. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Thomas's home. Our sixth stop is 1232 Greenwood Avenue, once the home of children's TV pioneer Frazier Thomas. When he first came to Wilmette in the 1950s, Frazier Thomas lived on Wilmette Avenue, but he and his family soon moved to this house on Greenwood. Thomas is famous for his show, Garfield, Goose, and Friends, and for the family movie show, Family Classics, which he created and hosted. If you grew up in the Chicago area from the early 1950s to the mid-1970s, you may remember the hand puppet, Garfield Goose, who sported a bow tie, a gold crown on his head, and thought he was king of the United States. None of the puppets on Garfield, Goose, and Friends would actually talk. Instead, Garfield Goose would clack his beak, and Frazier Thomas would translate for him. For many years, Thomas wore an elaborate blue uniform on the show because Garfield Goose had appointed him Prime Minister and Admiral of his Navy. On Saturdays, Frazier Thomas would bring this uniform to gold medal cleaners in downtown Wilmette to be cleaned for the next week of shows. Frazier Thomas, who died in 1985, is remembered in a plaque in the Memorial Garden at Wilmette's Trinity United Methodist Church. Before we move on, here's a brief clip of the opening music from Frazier Thomas's show, Garfield, Goose, and Friends. Our next stop will be 1930 Elmwood Avenue, once the home of Bill Murray. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Murray's home. Our seventh stop is 1930 Elmwood Avenue. Television and movie star Bill Murray grew up in this house in the 1950s and 60s as one of 9 children of Edward and Lucille Murray. There were lively times around the dining room table here, as the kids competed to make their dad laugh. At Christmas time, the kids put on a nativity play in the basement, and all the Murray children enjoyed playing on the grounds of the Mallinckrodt Convent across the street, although the nuns sometimes chased them away when the boys used the property as a driving range. The Murrays went to St. Joseph Church and St. Joseph School. Bill Murray and his brothers caddied at Indian Hill Club in Winnetka. If you stop by the museum, you can see Bill Murray's Wilmette Lions baseball team photo taken at Romer Park in 1962. Today, he is a Chicago Cubs fan and a longtime booster of minor league baseball. Bill Murray often quietly comes back to Wilmette for his class reunions. Among his most famous films are Ghostbusters, Caddyshack, and Groundhog Day. In 2016, he received the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Our next stop will be 1100 Locust Road, once the home of Jack Brickhouse. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Brickhouse's home. Our 8th stop is 1100 Locust Road, once the home of legendary sports announcer Jack Brickhouse. When Jack and his first wife Nelda moved to Wilmette in the 1950s, they lived on the corner of 8th and Linden. But in 1962, they moved to this house on Locust. They built a big playhouse in the backyard for their daughter Jean that all the neighbor kids played in. Brickhouse did play-by-play for the Chicago White Sox until 1967, and for the Chicago Cubs from 1948 to 1981, when he retired. In 1983, he was inducted into the broadcasters wing of the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. While best known for sportscasting in baseball, he also called Chicago Bears football games and Chicago Bulls basketball games. Brickhouse even interviewed President Reagan at the White House in 1981. Their conversation mostly covered Reagan's own days as a radio sportscaster in the 1930s that included play-by-play for the Chicago Cubs based on telegraph wires. Jack Brickhouse had a memorable voice and style. Longtime Cubs fans will remember his hey-hey home run calls. Here's an audio clip from his play-by-play of Ernie Banks hitting his 500th home run back in 1970.
There's a high fly deep to left. Miller and Wynn are both back. Hey! It's a home run for Banks! Attaboy, Ernie!
We're ready to move on to our next stop, 2822 Blackhawk Road, once the home of Charlie Trotter. Please pause your audio tour now, and I will meet you outside Trotter's home. Our 9th stop, 2822 Blackhawk Road, was the house where world-famous chef Charlie Trotter grew up. During his junior and senior high school years, Trotter began cultivating his entrepreneurial skills, cutting grass, cleaning gutters, and washing windows. His first foray into the restaurant business was as a lowly busboy at a restaurant called the Ground Round in Plaza del Lago. In a 1999 interview for a profile in North Shore magazine, Trotter remembered, quote, "Food wasn't a big event in our house, and we never went out to dinner, except for my mom's birthday or an anniversary, and that would be something like Hackney's on Lake," end quote. After graduation from New Trier, he learned the restaurant business at Sinclair's in Lake Forest, where he started as a cook. Trotter was a self-taught chef who, from these humble culinary beginnings, created a world-class Chicago restaurant, Charlie Trotter's, that was open for 25 years, 1987 to 2012, and won an incredible 11 James Beard Foundation Awards. He was the author of 14 cookbooks and the host of an award-winning PBS cooking series. Trotter's sudden death in 2013 at the age of 54 shocked and saddened his friends and fans all over the world. His legacy is honored by the Trotter Project, a charitable foundation created by family, friends, and coworkers to mentor culinary students like Trotter did during his lifetime. Our next and final stop will be 1214 North Branch Road, once the home of Bobbi Brown. Please pause your audio tour, and I will meet you outside Brown's home. Our 10th and last stop is 1214 North Branch Road, once the home of professional makeup artist and entrepreneur Bobbi Brown. Bobbi Brown grew up in Wilmette, daughter of James Brown and Sandra Kane. She graduated from New Trier West in 1975, where she was active in student government and in organizing student events. During her college years, she says that it took a while to find her passion, but she eventually found the perfect major in theatrical makeup at Emerson College. She began her career as a freelance makeup artist in New York City, working at fashion shows and photo shoots for glossy fashion magazines like Glamour and Vogue, and later for high-profile clients like Brooke Shields and Susan Sarandon. Building upon those experiences, she teamed up with a chemist to create her own line of cosmetics in 1990 and personally convinced Bergdorf Goodman in New York to be her first customer. From that small beginning, she created a multi-million-dollar business. Brown eventually sold her empire to Estee Lauder, but continues to be actively involved in the business. In 2020, she released a new makeup line, Jones Road. Brown is celebrated for her emphasis on enhancing a woman's natural beauty, an approach she has advanced in her many books on beauty. In her words, quote, "Beauty should be simple, real, and approachable," end quote. Today, she lives on the East Coast with her husband and 3 sons. This brings us to the end of our Wilmette Local Legends audio tour, Part 2. Thank you so much for joining the Wilmette Historical Museum to explore this bit of local history. We invite you to stop by and tour our museum at 609 Ridge Road. Part 1 of this audio tour can be found on the museum website.